Hey there folks, welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art and culture, and it's Billboard Breakdown. So am I the only one who thinks that something kind of strange is happening with the Hot 100 right now? I mean, I wouldn't say it's anything that far too afield, but while last week was near complete garbage, and the fact that a disturbing amount of it appears to be sticking around does not bode well, especially when that was the start of this Billboard year, but this week it seems rather slapdash, and I've got a hard time seeing much of this really sticking around and having any longevity beyond a brief blip on the radar before the holiday season and Christmas music sweeps a big chunk of it away. Now, granted, the one place where that appears to be pretty safe is our top 10, where for yet again another week, Rockstar by Post Malone featuring 21 Savage is at number 1. Now, I've said this song might be facing some trouble for a while now, but with the release of a music video that is blown up on YouTube, it might have bought itself a little bit more space in the margins, especially as it's still been doing pretty well on the radio. Yeah, Havana by Camila Cabello featuring Young Thug is doing better on the radio and is dominant in sales, but until it can make up at least a little bit more ground on streaming, it's not going to be going past number 2. It's stranded there. Now, that's not an issue for Gucci Gang by Lil Pump, which is only really here thanks to streaming with radio lagging hard, and really the second YouTube falters, I can see this having some real trouble beyond number 3, but you never know when that's going to happen. Then we got Thunder by Imagine Dragons at number 4, which absolutely rules the radio and had a particularly good sales week, but it also did seem to hit a peak on the radio, so it could be vulnerable going forward, especially with Perfect by Ed Sheeran rising up to number 5 on good sales, a considerable radio pickup, and more streaming than you would otherwise expect for Ed Sheeran. Now that puts it above Bodak Yellow by Cardi B down to number 6, but considering how it's been bleeding in the radio and on sales, that is to be expected. What surprised me a little bit more was Too Good at Goodbyes by Sam Smith down to number 7, but despite a good week on radio, it took serious losses in streaming and sales that could explain it. Then we saw a modest recovery for Feel It Still by Portugal the Man to number 8, but I'd argue that's more due to bigger losses above it falling past it than its strengths. Although you could make an argument that it did have a slight sales boost and it didn't quite decline as quickly on radio as I personally expected. But then we've got a returning entry to our top 10, Sorry Not Sorry by Demi Lovato at number 9. Mostly because of a good sales week and a slight radio stabilization. It was really up and down all week. And following with it is another returning entry to the top 10 with What Lovers Do by Maroon 5 featuring SZA at number 10, with even better sales and good radio making up for some miserable streaming. It might actually have a little bit of traction there. Not sure that's a good thing. Now, what doesn't have any traction are our losers and dropouts, and we had a few really big ones in the latter category, as 2017 is starting to sweep its hits away. What Ifs by Kane Brown featuring Lauren Elena, Crew by Gold Link featuring Brent Faiyaz and Shy Glizzy, Something Just Like This by the Chainsmokers and Coldplay, and finally, EXO Tour Life by Lil Uzi Vert. And following in that trend, our losses are pretty predictable too, with a particularly rough week for country music, with Every Little Thing by Carly Pearce continuing down to 84, Fix a Drink by Chris Jansen draining down to 55, and When It Rains It Pours by Luke Combs down to 51. Then we've got the expected big dip after the debut for Walk on Water by Eminem and Beyonce. I really don't see this sticking around all that much despite my general liking for it. It's gonna be interesting to see how much the album impacts it when it drops in less than 2 weeks. And then we got our considerable loss for Look What You Made Me Do by Taylor Swift down to 44. Because, with Reputation still not on streaming services, the trajectory for Taylor off of this album looks pretty bleak indeed. And speaking of bleak, our returning entries and our gains. And look, I've got a hard time feeling all that excited about any of this, especially when our solitary returning entry is Glorious by Macklemore featuring Skylar Grey back yet again. Seriously, who the hell has ever cared about this song? But if you're trying to trace what's going on with some of our gains, oh god, look, it's a mess. The most considerable boost off of huge sales and real radio traction is Wolves by Selena Gomez and Marshmello up to 20, and thanks to a streaming recovery, Bank Account by 21 Savage rebounded up to 15. But from there, off its debut, we have Gummo by 6ix9ine thanks to streaming, because apparently the United States of America doesn't have problems playing one-dimensional edgelord junk made by a child sex offender. Now, thankfully, our other gains never get quite that that bad, I'm not sure how they could. Betrayed by Lil Xan went up to 69 off its debut. Meant to Be by Florida Georgia Line and Bebe Rexha doesn't belong to country radio, but a good sales week put it at 42. Rubbing Off the Paint by YB and Namir went to 52 thanks to streaming, and Mayores by Becky G and Bad Bunny went up to 74. Now, it's not all bad news from there. Too Much to Ask by Niall Horan might not be a great song from that record, but I'm not complaining that it went up to 87. Or that Haley Steinfeld, Florida Georgia Line, Alesso, and Watt continue to push Let Me Go up to 53 on surprisingly decent sales. Or that Lemon by NERD and Rihanna rebounded hard up to 63 thanks to radio traction of all things. But for me, the real story is the boost for Candy Paint by Post Malone up to 66, which is starting to make some streaming gains. And look, for as much as Post Malone has been getting some justly deserved backlash for his dumbass comments this week, I still hope this song becomes a hit. It's the best hook in production that he's ever had, and we're gonna let Rockstar sit at #1 for 7 weeks now. We can give this a chance, right? Ugh, whatever. Let's move on to our list of new arrivals, of which, you know what, I'm not even gonna try to look for logic on most of these here. Let's just start off with number 100, Faking It by Calvin Harris featuring Kehlani and Lil Yachty.
Faking it to me, baby. Why you taking if you're over it? Why you say let go if you still holding it? Just a little bit better at faking it to me, baby. Just a little bit better at faking it to me, baby.
So let's not mince words. Calvin Harris has had a great year. Funk Wave Bounces Volume 1 was a summer record that was more enjoyable than really it had any right to be, and it produced a few legitimately great songs. And while Heatstroke underperformed criminally, I mean, you gave a video to Feels and not that, or Slide, Harris, what's wrong with you? You know what, the next obvious choice for a single would be Cash Out with Schoolboy Q and Party Next Door and Drum. But nope, instead we're giving another chance to Kehlani and Lil Yachty for no discernible good reason. Now let me make this clear, it's not the worst song on the album. The stiff, wiry, 80s inspired R&B can have some appeal, especially opens up into a more of a sandy groove for the hook. And Kehlani effectively makes the sour vibe kind of click for her, even if all the subtext goes right over Lil Yachty's head and he plays things way more earnestly in his pizza-inspired ramblings. But again, in a world where we have Cash Out as a possible single, there's no excuse for this to be here. Yeah, it's tolerable, sure, but there were so many better choices. Number 99, Written in the Sand by Old Dominion.
Get it while we can. Are we names in a tattoo, or just a number on a hand? Are we last call kissing, or will we be reminiscing with each other for the next 40 years? Are we written in the stars, baby, or are we written in the sand?
So look, I have made it abundantly clear over the past year or so that I don't like these guys. They're painfully slick in the wrong ways in their production, the writing can make my skin crawl, and the fact that the industry wants to prop this brand up a pop country instead of so many other more deserving acts is obnoxious to the highest degree. And while this might be marginally better than most of their songs with a little bit richer melodic groove on the hook and the bridge, the painfully fake beat and snap, the thin backing vocals, and how obviously the guitar is clipped on the hook in some of the verses reveals the same problem that I've had with this group since the very beginning, an embrace of jerky staccato progressions that compromise both their grooves and any sort of real melody, and on top of vocals that really are not all that expressive, and an incredibly tepid will they won't they progression that, for as much as it wants to get to the point, remains metaphorical all the way through, kind of misses the point again. Again, this is tolerable, I guess. Probably one of the more likable songs that Old Dominion has ever released as a single, but it's really hard for me to care or remember this song. Number 98, The Rest of Our Life by Tim McGraw and Faith Hill.
If one gray hair shows, I'll be fine. If my waistline goes, I'll be fine. Even if time takes its toll, we'll stay up for the rest of our lives.
And on the topic of pop-leaning country acts making schmaltzy relationship songs, here we've got the title track from that Faith Hill album masquerading as a duets record that I and everybody else has already forgotten about, and I reviewed it last week. But to be fair, this is one of the few good songs from that album. The prominent piano holding the melody, it's solid against the gentle guitars, and I like when the pedal steel wells up on the bridge. The sentiment, it is kinda sweet, and while the lyrical detail is a little bit too oddly specific, it's pretty easy to see where Ed Sheeran was contributing lyrics here, but it does does feel sincere, I'll give it that. But at the same time, man, it's obvious that Tim McGraw and Faith Hill produced this themselves, from the generally cheap fidelity of most of the tones, how the vocals on the hook awkwardly top out, and considering that Tim McGraw is trying his falsetto here, this song is awkward enough already. At least there's more melodic flow and passion. I'll take this over Old Dominion, but both of these artists have done better in the past, and I sincerely hope this doesn't stick around. It's passable, but not much better than that. Number 96, No Smoke by YoungBoy, Never Broke Again.
Many niggas don't want no smoke. No smoke, no smoke. You niggas don't want it. I can't go, won't go. Won't leave my mama lonely. No smoke, no smoke. But we die about that money. No smoke, no smoke. You niggas don't want it.
Okay, serious question. Does anybody actually care or remember this guy? I mean, I covered him when I was on vacation and when he showed up on a song with A Boogie with a Hoodie, but I went back to both of those songs ahead of covering this, and the most that I can really say is that it's generic nasal mumble rap against glossy trap production that I have heard hundreds of times already this year. It's not all that distinct or special. And if anything, this song reminds me more of Kodak Black with the grinding words and the wonky auto-tune flows around it. And the sooner we can leave that style and that artist in 2017, the better. And that's before we get to the bars themselves, which awkwardly force rhymes and all circle around shooting people in the most formulaic and empty way possible. It's just not really interesting. Again, I feel like I cover these sorts of songs every week and I forget them just as quickly. And I'm not hearing anything remotely distinctive here to give me any reason to remember why this guy exists. So yeah, pass. Number 95, Beautiful Trauma by Pink.
You, my perfect rock bottom, beautiful trauma, my love, my trauma.
Okay, so let's make this abundantly clear. The reason that this charted at all is because of the video with Channing Tatum. And yeah, it's kind of a cute video with a sweet message that shows how much fun and fulfillment can be found in breaking out of clearly delineated societal and sexual roles, both for Pink and her partner. And yeah, it's technicolor and goofy, but I like the sincerity of the song and how game Channing Tatum is. And it's a shame that this really isn't one of the better songs off of that album. I mean, seriously, You Have Better Life and I Am Here, and you go with the title track, which really feels way too arranged and classy with the horns and the piano for the content or Pink's delivery, which looks to be yet another case of Jack Antonoff not quite grasping the intent of the artist for whom he's producing. And sure, the scuzzy warping effects and the wiry synth that does kind of help the vibe, but they're plainly not the melodic focus, which can get a little bit exasperating as a whole. Now, granted, Pink's a good enough performer in order to handle that, and while lyrics are very much overwrought, she's one of the few artists who could conceivably sell this. Shame she's not really on her A game here beyond the verses, which are more expressive. And again, the song's really only on the Hot 100 thanks to that video. Let's hope she puts out something better, like, anytime soon. Number 92, When We by Tank.
When we, I could be aggressive, I can be a savage, I just need your blessing, say that I can never. When we,
Okay, we need some historical context for this, because when I saw that Tank, of all people, had a new song on the Hot 100, I was genuinely shocked. I mean, you all remember this guy, right? He had 2 minor hits in the early 2000s, 1 in 2007, and pretty much nothing until this. Yeah, I'm not really that surprised, but when I went back to those hits, I was actually surprised how much I liked them mostly. A little less charismatic than Usher, a little bit more mature than Neo, but not quite as classy as John Legend. I would probably have slotted him with a similar category as guys like Maxwell. I listened to the record that's coming out this year, where he started embracing the auto-tune, dreary trap darkness that has suffocated so much of modern contemporary R&B. Now, granted, Tank's deeper, more authoritative tones will always work a lot more for me than a guy like Bryson Tiller, and he certainly has more command of his mix that kind of makes this song, at least for me. But him describing himself as a savage so that this girl will call him master? Okay, look, dude, you're over 40. If you want to make a sex song, you don't have to default to the ugly cliches of guys 20 years younger than you. It reminds me of an unfortunate way of guys like Keith Urban and Luke Bryan, who haven't really learned how to age gracefully with a lot of their material. So while as a performer, I do like Tank on this song, it actually is a pretty decent track, I feel like he'd be getting a lot more in the content. This is not bad by any stretch. Again, I think this is a decent song, but again, this should be a little bit better. Number 90, Home by Machine Gun Kelly, Ex-Ambassadors, and Bebe Rexha.
Off my shoulders, someone take me home. Home, a place where I can go to take this off my shoulders. Someone take me home.
Okay, to explain why this is here, you all need to know about an upcoming Will Smith vehicle from the director of Suicide Squad called Bright that's dropping around Christmas this year to be crushed by all the Oscar bait and The Last Jedi, which is apparently a cop movie on an alternate Earth where humans and fantasy creatures have always existed, and if this sounds kinda cheap and awful, you now understand why it's being dropped in seasonal garbage time. Anyway, in the tradition of Suicide Squad, we're getting a crossover song bringing together Machine Gun Kelly, Ex-Ambassadors, and Bebe Rexha. And yeah, that also sounds kind of awful. And then you hear that MGK wrote these verses on the same day that Chester Bennington died, and you feel a little bit faintly sick that they were repackaged into soundtrack fodder fronted by Ex-Ambassadors and Bebe Rexha, filling in behind the hooks in the sparse bridge. Granted, I'm not really surprised that happened, given how thin and lacking in real detail MGK's verses are, nearly all focused on his own struggles rather than any sorts of overwhelming grief or loss. But you know what, that's also pretty much the case with the production here. Flimsy vocal pickups for the hook, generic desaturated blocky beat full of fake claps, weedy guitars, especially on the pre-chorus, which does not sound good, and a piano melody that somehow completely runs out of momentum. It's too flimsy and underwritten to be all that weighty, and yet way too self-serious to function as a decent pop rap tune. Really, if we're looking for more disposable and mediocre soundtrack filler that we hope will not stick around, it's this. Next, number 86, Endgame by Taylor Swift featuring Future and Ed Sheeran.
I wanna be your A-team. I wanna be your endgame, endgame. Big reputation, big reputation. Ooh, you and me, we got big reputations. And you heard about me. Ooh, I got some big enemies.
So I already spent way too much time talking about Taylor Swift when I reviewed Reputation, so I'm going to endeavor to keep this pretty brief. Melodically, it's desaturated, swamped out in the bass, and clunky, which we're reliant on its trap beat or on the flows of its artists to keep things interesting, which is one reason why Ed Sheeran sounds so much more awkward opposite in comparison with Future. Even if Ed Sheeran's content is marginally more interesting, it fits the song a little better. And sure, Taylor Swift's cooing is okay, but the second she tries rapping, especially on the post-choruses, especially that final verse, I mean, look, personality can make up for a lot, but it's pretty damn hard for me to buy into her not loving the drama considering the rest of the album, especially with how self-aggrandizing the rest of the song is in feeding Taylor Swift's ego. But the truth is that the only reason the song actually managed to cross over are these featuring credits, and once the novelty fades, let's hope this fades with it. Number 79, Awful Things by Lil Peep.
You know I love it when you do that. Helps me get through this without you. Bother me, tell me awful things. You know I love it when you move that on me. Love it when you do that on me.
Oh god, this is awkward. See, I never review Lil Peep, mostly because my patrons aren't all sadists and they never put any of his tapes on my schedule, and since what I did here I didn't like, I had no impetus to cover any of this myself, and yet when he died a few weeks ago of a drug overdose at the age of 21, I had the uneasy feeling that I'd eventually have to wind up reviewing something that would pick up some spins and cross over to the radio. And sure enough, he's got a posthumous song on the Hot 100. And look, there's a part of me that wants to be somewhat kind out here out of respect for the dead, but let's be blunt, this isn't very good. The nasal vocals sound like a bad Tom DeLonge impression back when he was in Angels and Airwaves, paired with a cruddy, rattling guitar pickup that for some reason is buried behind the sandy trap beat and whirring vocal effects. In other words, a blend of emo and trap that has all the vapid emotionality of the former and all the trend-following, dead-eyed nihilism of the latter. At least with a guy like XXXTentacion, at his best there was a darker core incompetently executed. With this I don't get much of a core at all. Look, it sucks that he died young, and it really should prompt a serious conversation surrounding responsible and safe drug usage in the pharmaceutical industry, but this is mediocre at best. I can't endorse it. Sorry. And finally, number 47, Echame La Culpa by Luis Fonsi and Demi Lovato. Okay, so when I saw this charting, I can't be the only one faintly amused by some history repeating itself, right? I mean, I remember Christina Aguilera's Spanish record in 2000 trying to follow the Latin trends of the time, and for as much as Demi Lovato has emulated similar frustrations in her own career in terms of direction, I'm not even surprised she's teaming up with Luis Fonsi for a song. But unlike Christina, I was actually a little bit encouraged by the idea of this track. Songs that let Demi Lovato get loose and a little bit more sexual and sensual often bring out a level of subtlety that she rarely uses, and Luis Fonsi has good enough instincts and chemistry in order to coax out some of those instincts. And okay, this comes close to working, but it's not better than Despacito or some of Demi Lovato's better songs, and I'm still struggling to pin down why. The percussion and the guitars that drive the song, they're welcome, but the buzzy synth that accents parts doesn't really help the blockier beat. And while they both sound pretty good in Spanish, Demi Lovato's English lyrics can't help but feel kinda distracting, especially when they reference the Beatles, a band that at best has only ever grazed Latin music next to jazz. On top of that, the content can feel a little bit odd here too. Both artists are apologizing for some sort of indiscretion that they're both fighting to see who wants the most blame here. They're not blaming each other, they're blaming themselves. I mean, it seems kind of flimsy. A bit of a waste of a collaboration that could have done a fair bit more with these two artists. But you know what, as it is, it's kind of passable. And on a week as rough as this one was, I'm giving it the honorable mention. When, with the best, I'm actually gonna give it to Tank with When We. I mean, I'm as surprised as anybody, but if we're gonna get this style of R&B, he can at least carry it with the gravitas that it probably deserves. And you know what, for the worst, I'm gonna spare Lil Peep this. I'm not that cruel, and I do see the appeal of the song, which means I'm gonna give this to Home by Machine Gun Kelly, X-Ambassadors, and Bebe Rexha for being a flagrantly ill-advised tribute that winds up as soundtrack garbage. With this honorable mention going to No Smoke by YoungBoy Never Broke Again for that ugly-ass flow. So yeah, another pretty bad week, and I really have no idea what's gonna break it coming up. I guess Christmas might be a redeeming factor, but we'll see what happens, I guess. But until then, I'm Mark, you're watching Billboard Breakdown on Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.